Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to the MOOC EMI, MOOC in EMI. Oh dear. Let me turn off the volume of my computer because that's having some horrible interference.
Yes, it's a bit confusing.
This is what happens when you go live.
It does, yes. And we're not very experienced.
That's the thing. Yes, so welcome everybody. Thank you again for participating in the MOOC. We've had some really interesting ideas coming up. Very high quality comments from lots of people who are raising interesting things and good continuity as well as we're going through. We're seeing issues that were raised in week 1 coming back again and again in later weeks, which we were hoping for.
Yes,
to get a good coherent direction through EMI. And so we've had some interesting areas of discussion that have come up, some questions that have been raised. We're going to focus this live session on some areas that we haven't talked about before so much. And we'll, so Mary, do you want to start us off with our first area? Thank you.
Yes, so Rob's mentioned certain threads that are now emerging in the discussions and the questions and answers. And the first one I'd like to pick up on is technology. It's there all the time, but we haven't really talked about it very much indeed, which is kind of strange really, because we're using so much technology, to be able to communicate with you. But to give you some examples of where technology has been talked about specifically. If we look at, for example, section 3.13, which, if you remember, is the section about teaching larger groups. Now, this is where technology can be a problem, but it can also be a help, because some of the things that you've mentioned are, well, you have a lecture theatre full of more than 100 students, and you've got some, with their smartphone, using Facebook or something. Yes, that can happen. So what can we do to try and bring those people in to be a member of the group and participating in the group activities and so on? And this is where technology can actually help, because there are apps now that students can download onto their smartphones, and you might be able to, and it might not work for everybody, but for some of you, you can have little quizzes, you can have questions and answers, voting, etc. And that will then pull in everybody in the group, because they're all, wanting to see how the group as a whole has voted, what people's opinions are, and so on. And of course, the results then are anonymous. So people are not giving away anything about themselves in this use of the apps in the classroom. So that's one way that technology can be helpful and solve a problem.
That can also be done, often people do it as a way of individualizing, but it can be done in small groups or pairs as well, so that you do have a layer of face-to-face communication as well as just a question from the teacher and then individual responses. And to sprinkle some skepticism on this, I do agree, and I use technology in some lectures, but every single language class that I've observed at this university that had a heavy focus on the use of technology, of interactive technology, for me, the class was worse as a result of the use of technology. So I would emphasize that technology is not the solution. The teaching principles remain the same. I think you want to create genuine interaction. You want people to engage with the content honestly and engagingly. And sometimes some technology can reduce your content to A, B, C, or D, rather than getting into critical areas of discussion. So you can't have a discussion very easily with some forms of technology. So I just say, just be careful. And again, I do use it, and I hope I use it at least to an okay level. But I think sometimes it goes quite well. But there is a danger if you get people using technology that you're you're not, it seems interactive, but what you're essentially doing is asking, do you agree with me, yes or no, or true or false, many times in a class. And actually the students find it incredibly boring.
Yeah, that would not be appropriate. What I'm thinking of is the ways to just pull in students at certain times appropriately. Rather than, you know, I have seen people saying, now put down your smartphone, things like that, which is totally inappropriate. So there is a place there. If students do have smartphones, there is a place for using them in the classroom.
And maybe signalling
wisely.
Yeah, we talked about signalling stages of the group. Where are we going to in the next part of the lecture, something like that. So it's interesting.
So what we're talking about there is the use of perhaps apps on a smartphone to mark the stages of a lecture for issues of inclusion, bringing everybody together, for changing the dynamics, perhaps even handing over some responsibilities to students, if perhaps in small groups they wanted to create a little questionnaire or a quiz, or voting for the rest of the class, you know, so that there are quite a number of possibilities there.
Can I just mention as well?
Yes.
Because I can see in the corner here, hello to John.
Oh,
John is here. Thank you for your contributions.
John. Hey.
It's been very interesting to discuss. He's been one of the discussants who's been raising some very interesting and critical points.
And very frequently as well. Thank you, John.
And John just mentions here that something helpful.
There is a MOOC. Sorry, I can't see very well.
I was going to say, do you want me to read it, Mary?
No. There is a MOOC by Cambridge on Futurelearn online training in the transferring of your skills into an online environment. So that would be very handy for all of us to look at. And thank you, John, very much indeed.
Other MOOCs are available.
Other MOOCs are available, yes.
Yeah. So that sounds really interesting. And again, that sounds like what we're talking about, you know, transferring the sort of face-to-face learning environment into an online environment. Absolutely.
I mean, the other thing I do like about people being able to vote or participate in quizzes via apps and so on is the fact that, you know, you do get the dominant ones in the classroom who answer questions and ask questions. And in a big group, you know, some people do feel as if their voice is not being heard. Whereas with something like this, everybody has an equal voice. And that can be a nice thing to have. And
another area of concern is does education in the kind of interactive, engaging kind of paradigm we're living in, does it favor extroverts over introverts? Does the introverted student who feels anxiety about talking in front of their peers, are they disadvantaged by this learning environment where everything is communicative and dynamic? You know, we have to find some ways of including the people who are more introverted, thoughtful, and would rather not expose themselves in one manner of speaking in front of everyone else.
And I think we can come back later on to opportunities for everybody in the class to have a voice and be heard, but we'll leave that for later. A question that I wanted to ask you, actually, I don't have any experience myself of this particular software. It's called Tophat, and I do know that a lot of teachers use it with large classes in order to encourage participation and so on. Now, what has put me off is that you have to pay for it. There's a free demo, a free demonstration, but then if you actually seriously want to use it, you have to pay for it. So if you do have any experience of Tophat or any other software like that, could you perhaps on this step give us some feedback? Because I think we'd all like to learn about what's out there. And it would be lovely to hear back from you, if you do have some experience that you could share with us. And
on a previous step, some people mentioned Socrative.
Yes.
And using Moodle.
No, not Moodle.
It wasn't Moodle.
No, it was
another one. Vivox is another one that I've used, and that's quite useful.
Because Kahoot.
Kahoot. I always get
Kahoot.
those.
That's right. It's
Yeah.
Kahoot as well.
So
I've used
Socrative
that,
is good
yes.
for quizzes.
Yeah.
VVox is good because it's the same principle, but you can put it into your PowerPoint slides. So the results are shown. So you can ask a question and, for example, give 4 possible answers, and then the what people have posted goes directly onto your PowerPoint slide. So that's quite useful. But there are lots of them available now, and lots of different options. So we mentioned quizzes, but there are also, for example, oh, my vocabulary is going. What's that called? Words that are used most often become bigger. So you can ask, what words do you associate with this concept?
Yes.
What's that called?
I can't think of the word.
Wordle.
Wordle. Thank you, Mimi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi.
So lots of different options now where what you're talking about might have different forms of visualization for students and different ways to engage them. So Mimi, would you like to come this side of the camera? No, okay.
We'll go behind the camera, shall we? Yeah, so we really would like your feedback. Would appreciate that feedback.
And Zoom. John has recommended Zoom as a conferencing environment.
Thank you, John.
Thank you,
That's
John,
lovely.
yes.
That's great. Really appreciate it.
I'll try that.
But at the same time, we do know that not everybody is in a position to use much technology. We're very fortunate here in Southampton that we do have wonderful people like Mimi who can be available to film us, and we have access to a lot of technology and we're very well supported, but not everybody is. So I hate to suggest in any way that you have to go down this technology route in a big way, because your circumstances might not allow you to do that. And I'm not saying that having technology at your fingertips to use in the EMI classroom is going to make it a better EMI experience. It's not like that at all. It's just that if we have these tools, we want to use them well in the EMI context. That's all I'm saying. Not that we have to have them. And
yes, so for the John is mentioning Google Docs and classrooms for management and quizzes as well. Yes.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, and also Microsoft Teams is quite a good one as well for getting students to work in groups together, because they get notifications when there's a discussion happening. Sometimes a discussion board, you have to log in to see whether the discussions are taking place. Microsoft Teams is quite good for notifications of when somebody's added something to the conversation, or you can share documents and things like that. So that's another one. But yeah, clearly it's not always the latest and most modern sort of interface that's what's useful. And I was going to mention the simplicity of like email as well, where or
speaking to somebody.
Yeah. But one thing that came up this week actually was the so we watched the 2 videos of the slightly less prepared, less effective lecturer who was acting slightly, by the way. We should say
must reinforce the message that Adam was acting.
It's very good, actually, isn't he?
Yes.
Surprising.
And then Stephanie, who was giving the very professional performance, the talk about pirates, So if we move on to that now.
Well, no, I was going to add another point just quickly about technology, just to add that something as simple as having the expectations that students even read emails at certain times. If you're, because we mentioned with the being late, I have a lecture that I have to deliver, and I have to get from one campus to another campus in the space of 15 minutes, which is incredibly difficult to do. And so when he walks in late and says, "Oh, sorry," and starts setting up his PowerPoint, that's something that I do. Yeah, but I have to do that because I'm not fit enough to run from one campus to the other campus. And actually, I'm too shy. I don't want to jog past my students looking really late. So I do my fast walk, but I normally get there at about the time I should be beginning my teaching. And again, this is where technology can help, because if I know I'm running late, I can email them and expect and have an email group set up, or some kind of interface, maybe Microsoft Teams, where they get a notification that I'm sending them a discussion task. So at the beginning of that lecture, I'm going to come in and they should have already started their discussion or already started knowing that I want them to present, like say, a response to a question at the beginning. So there are things like that, just being in contact with students. We've got lots of virtual learning environments, but the real underlying purpose of them is to connect people. It's to get people to understand, to remind, to engage people. The knowledge is the same or is very similar. It's just keeping a constant message and this kind of transition from the classroom to what you're doing outside the classroom, how your thinking progresses over time. This is just simple communication, but technology offers us a greater opportunity to regularly engage in, remember this learning outcome? How are you going with this? Or reflect on this area in a new way that's not just about what you do in the classroom, it's also about outside. So even the simplest things like email can be used these days because we expect people to read their emails more often than when they sit at home in their office. You know, I expect students to pick them up on their phones. So yeah. I was just going to add that as well.
Yeah. And let's face it, the generation coming through, you know, have phones, they're going to use them. So let's take advantage of it and not ban them, as I know some teachers do. And that might be appropriate with some groups of students. But I think dealing with the more mature students that I believe a lot of us are dealing with, let's think of ways of using those phones to our advantage rather than seeing them as problems.
And kind of also connecting to the wider community as well, because they can, you know, they can use technology to enter networks that exist elsewhere. I know people who have courses and they expect their students to engage with, let's say, Wikipedia editors, to engage with discussions with people interested in that field that go way beyond the university context. And in an EMI setting, I could see real advantages in that as well.
Yes.
You know, it's not just about learning this knowledge that I have in this book. It's about going out and engaging with the wider world, and there are lots of opportunities for that. You know, collaborations with other universities, even where people are in a similar situation. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. So yeah,
Good.
Sorry, we will move on, Mary. What's your next point of interest?
The next point of interest was to talk about Stephanie's lecture in a little bit more detail, picking up from something that I think we touched on last week. And in commenting on Stephanie's lecture, a couple of people made the observation that she was in fact reading. And I think we believe that we did talk about this last week, that there are cases when people deliver a paper, as you said, and it is expected that they would read it. I think Stephanie's lecture, if taken out of context, could be criticised from that point of view that maybe she was reading, but we have to imagine it back in context, and we have to see it as part of a continuum, that there would have been something beforehand that would have prepared the students for the content of that lecture. In all probability, some reading materials to set them up for what Stephanie was going to talk about. That possibly she would have printed off worksheets, that the PowerPoint presentations with the note facility, so that they could be making notes next to each slide. So they would have something to guide them through their notes-taking exercise in the classroom. And then there would be, in all probability, some kind of seminar, discussion, workshop, during which the students could clarify what they had heard and learnt during the lecture, question it, discuss it, take it further, whatever Stephanie would want to do with it. So I think if you place it back into what one can imagine the context would be, then the teacher who does need to get through quite a lot of material, might be in a situation of reading, but then there's reading and there's reading. There's reading in an interesting and a vibrant way, and there's reading in a very sort of like monotonous way because I just want to get to the end of the lecture. There are lots and lots of different ways that we can read. We can pause, we can ask questions. So it was just an example of some good features of good lecturing, but we're not saying that we expect that to be the norm for a lot of us, really, but it could be for some of us.
Yeah.
And you spoke about several genres that you understand lecturers do read quite a lot.
Yes.
In certain
English,
disciplines.
I think I mentioned English literature and philosophy. People tend to deliver a paper, and that, I think it's the expectation of the audience. You expect a kind of performance. So it's like you give a paper and you do read your paper, but you really perform it to the audience. If you took, my lecturing style tends to be quite, I think at times a bit spoken and kind of communicative, trying to be a bit like if we're face to face and some elements of performance. But if I spoke in the communicative face to face style and it was clear that I was reading, there'd be a kind of breakdown.
Yes.
You know, so no, you wouldn't have a conversation with someone if they were reading their half of the conversation to you. So you can't achieve a natural communicative style if you're reading, but you can perform when you're reading. So like you see some actors. I'm thinking of, I saw recently, I've forgotten his name, the person who was in Lord of the Rings and played Gandalf.
Oh,
but he's
Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen.
Yeah.
So he's doing a tour, and sometimes he'll be given a script and he'll say, "Oh, I'll deliver this script." It's kind of very entertaining.
Yes.
But he can perform the script, even if he is reading. He can make people feel, "Wow, he's a great actor." But then you're delivering a kind of product to them, and you've got to be good at reading. If you're reading because you lack the confidence to be able to say it, then that's a different thing. So there are a lot of considerations to come in here, and most important, I think we said in week 1, the one thing you have to consider is the student, because successful communication only exists in a class if the students understand what you're doing and it makes sense to them. And if it doesn't, or if there's a problem, then that's likely to be a problem that remains there, you know.
Yeah. A number of you did mention the fact that lecturing, teaching is like acting. And I do find with a number of teachers that I've met over the years, quite a number of them do come from an amateur dramatic background. You know, they've had an interest in performing. And I do feel that a number of us must have that identity, that teacher identity, that when we go into the classroom, it is like being on a stage and we have a different type of persona when we're in front of a class. I think I do. But it's not that different from the way I am in real life. It's
you are quite...
I'm what? What's he going to say? I'm worried now. What are you going to say?
Everything's a drama, honestly. Yeah.
Yes, but I don't think that for me there's a very big difference, but I think for some teachers there is quite a big difference between the way they are in real life and the way they are in the classroom.
Absolutely. And a good actor is someone you can believe as well. And I think some people don't have that style. I think going back to, a few weeks ago, we were talking about Chomsky and like these academics who just deliver. They seem very honest and they just talk to the audience and keep them captivated just because they seem quite genuine.
And they've got charisma
They've got charisma.
And most of us don't have that. We're just ordinary people.
That's it. So you can perform and you can really keep people entertained, or you can generate respect and just honest communication. Some people are just very good at being themselves and keeping an audience interested through their own personality. But
But most of us, we can only aspire to that. We just try and do our best.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there anything else we wanted to say about reading and Stephanie's lecture? Was there anything else? on that point? I think we've dealt with
I
that now,
think-
haven't we?
I think so.
I
If
think
you
we
are
have.
happy.
Oh,
I
I'm
think we
always
could move
happy.
along. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Um,
Right. Well, the other thing that comes up is the discussion in step 3.15, when we were discussing students who like my lectures less when I teach in English. And there were some really perceptive comments on that step. So I do encourage you to go back and read them if you haven't done so already. Eduardo, hello Eduardo, I can't thank you enough for all the participation, that you and the time that you're devoting to writing considerable responses to the questions that we ask and helping the discussions to move along. You wrote about the fearful attitude of failing, and this makes me think about the underlying aim of this MOOC, which is trying to foster, nurture, instill confidence in people at a distance. Now, as we've said before, EMI is not about language. I mean, it's partly about getting the language right, but it's a lot of other things as well. And if I were working with somebody and I was trying to make Rob feel more confident, it's easier to say the words when you have that proximity, you have the eye contact, you have the sheer physicality of that person next to you to help them to feel better about themselves. But for us, for Rob and I, trying to make you in your different environments all over the world feel confident is really difficult. And I don't think we know how to do it. All we can do is say, we're encouraging you to feel more confident. But perhaps putting to one side any ideas of being perfect. A lot of us suffer from wanting to be perfect, that the ideal, this perfectionism that we want to try and aspire to. And if you can somehow pick up from Rob and I that we are trying to do our best to make you feel okay about yourselves, about your words, about the decisions that you make around teaching EMI in your context. We've said before, you are the experts. We are not. We are only in our little world, our little bubble. But we really do want you to know that you can make the right decisions, and they will be the right decisions for you in your context. And the other people on the group actually, I'm sure, are sending that same message to everyone. And this is why it is important to like and to comment, and the strength of the community can make you feel that little bit more confident in your work. And coming back to what Eduardo was saying, that led into some other interesting points by other people, from people such as Derek and John saying, be patient, and some. There's some really good practical suggestions. And it leads into a comment that Derek made about the needs analysis, which I'd like to talk about in greater detail. We have mentioned that. A lot of people think that the needs analysis at the beginning of the course just gives you the information about who the students are. Yes, that's valuable information. But the other thing that the needs analysis does is it asks the students to reflect. It's a preparation exercise. So you're really asking students to reflect upon what they expect to get from the course that you are going to deliver. And it could be that the students' expectations and then the experience on the course, they don't actually match, they don't fit. And this can be where some dissatisfaction or not liking my course, my lectures as much if they're in another language or in English and so on. So we need to try and do something about it. And what I would suggest, and it is something that people forget, is that a needs analysis is not just like once, just for one time only. It can be repeated. So once you're into your course, and you may be wondering about student expectations and how the course is going and what the students seem to prefer with regard to delivery and so on, do repeat the exercise. It doesn't have to be on paper, or it can be a discussion. But if you can try and get a shorter picture of the expectations at the beginning and then at the end, that is something for you to gather together this information and then reflect upon. Because I'm making the assumption that we are all teachers who reflect upon our experiences, that self-reflection is a part of our practice. Some of you might do it in quite a structured and formal way. You might kind of keep a diary or a log of your thoughts and experiences. I used to do that. I used to be very enthusiastic. Now I'm a lot lazier. I just think about these things when I'm driving home in the evening, because I've got quite a long commute, as does Rob. We both live quite a way away from Southampton. So it's something I just think about in the car. I reflect on my teaching that day and what I want to improve on and how I can make things better. So this is leading into something that Rob wants to talk about, and that is being a model of reflection for your students. You are teachers who reflect, so let's encourage our students to reflect upon their experience as well. And I've been speaking for far too long, so I'll hand over to Rob.
Yes, and you're beginning to say the words that I'm going to say. Encourage your students.
Yes, encourage your students.
No, yes, and I'll also add, so John's just mentioned down here.
Ooh.
Sorry, my eyes keep going down to the away from the camera, but that's because people
the confidence comes with using the fear as a positive force for better performance. It then becomes a comforting friend. Oh, that's a lovely thing to say. Thank you, John. Oh, yeah, lovely way of putting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Now I have to follow
Yes.
Follow John's wise words there. That's very difficult. Yes. But yeah, I was just going to mention very briefly the idea of reflection and how that really, again, it's this difference. So, it's the similarity. EMI is not always different from what we do as educators.
No.
It's just
So.
creates a more complex environment where the principles of education become more important in some ways, depending on the context. But this is the thing, it becomes more important. And the idea of reflection, and just to add to that, is critical reflection. It's dialogic reflection. So you want to learn from students about what their needs are. You also want to learn what you need to change and what they need to change. Because sometimes, we live in a customer-driven market in some ways. When you speak to some people in a university environment, how do we meet the students' needs as paying customers is one way of thinking. And then you get other ways of thinking. How do we teach these receptacles? How do we fill them with our knowledge and send them away? That's the traditional model of education. And the best way of dealing with it for me is between those two. People are coming in with needs. They can understand the subject. If you adapt what you're trying to do to what they're coming with, and you respect the knowledge they come with, you respect the preferences they come with, which you need to understand as the teacher, but also they have to understand what you're trying to do. They have to understand the wider community of practice around your discipline. So it's all very well, they want to learn in a particular way, but maybe that's not how physicists communicate. That's not how people in medicine think. So at some point there has to be this compromise. And that's where reflection comes in. So the idea that constantly through what you teach or through the module, as Mary said, you don't just want one needs analysis. You want some different ways of accessing students' understanding. What beliefs are they coming to your course with? And also, in yourself, what beliefs do you have that you don't realize you have? What preferences, what biases about learning, about education, and about your field do you have when you're teaching? And I ask these questions of myself. Am I
when you're driving home?
When I'm driving home,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, when the stereo's not on.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also sort of examine what things might be changing for you. I find that interesting because I know when I first started teaching, my goodness, it's miles and miles or kilometers and kilometers away from the person I am now as a teacher with my beliefs and the approaches that I bring to my teaching. And to be in a position to identify those changes is very positive. You can really build on that once you really can identify and acknowledge them.
And another, again, a good point of access, I think it's one of the themes of this video, is also the collaborative aspect. So it's a lot of beliefs, biases, and sort of ways of compromising and negotiating knowledge come better when you have a collaborative environment. So it's not just, I want to know what my individual students think. It's we can engage together in parts of the subject matter and how is this program going for all of you. If you can get them to discuss as individuals and engage with each other, then they start to realize that different people perceive the content differently. Different people have different goals, and then they can understand and communicate better with you, and you can understand what they need to change and what you need to change in a much more dynamic environment than if you simply say 1 to 5, do you like the course so far, or something like that. So again, and I think technology is a good way of engaging with that process.
I think so.
Discussion boards, things like that, related to, what didn't you understand? What would you have preferred to have done in this particular area? It could be a good way of accessing whether students are following your motivations, your justifications for how they're learning and what they're doing.
And I'd like to add that there's nothing wrong with like paper-based needs analyses or questionnaires, whatever it is that you're going to use to try and measure the perceptions of the students, because I know that I've made wrong assumptions in the past as to how well a course might be going. If everybody in a class writes anonymously, then going back to what I was saying a long time ago when we started this session this afternoon, everybody has a voice, and it's so easy to be persuaded by the people with the confidence and the louder voices. Acknowledging that everybody has a voice and seeing what people anonymously write can be obviously quite revealing. So I think there's a lot to be said for quietly writing something down on a piece of paper.
And it can be surprising because what people do is not always what they want to do. The quiet ones are not necessarily people who want to be quiet.
No.
The loud ones are sometimes people filling gaps, but they don't want to be talking. So there's a lot of interesting things. Yes, should we go on to a question?
Well, there was a question about
from Luciana,
CLIL, wasn't there? Yes. Yeah.
So she asked, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but she asked what CLIL techniques might be useful in EMI.
Right.
And should I take that on? Would you like to say anything?
Well, I don't feel that I'm an expert in anything really, but I wouldn't call myself an expert in CLIL. It's something that I've read about and researched a little bit. I have never been a CLIL teacher, so I can't speak with that kind of experience. But certainly I think there's a lot to be learnt from the way vocabulary areas and lexical items are dealt with in the CLIL classroom. There's a lot of that can have a place in EMI if that's what your students need. Then I think that's your decision. And if I were to find myself in an EMI classroom, but with some kind of sense of needing a more language orientated focus to a session, if that was what my students needed in order to be able to move on with my content, I wouldn't have any hesitation to blend the two. I don't know about you, Rob.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a false divide in some ways.
It is.
Because,
that's true.
I mean, even the sense that I think EMI, the way some people write about EMI is it involves no language instruction. But on some level, when I teach home students, there's some language instruction, because if the feedback that they need is linguistic on some level, like you're using these words and that's not how we talk about it in this field, or presentation techniques. We were joking before, I was mentioning that, some of my students were reading from their smartphone, which was here, doing assessed group presentations, and these are British students, and we were two of us assessing these presentations, which were part of their summative assessment. And we just kind of looked at each other as, is he really reading from his phone? But yeah, it's there are sort of linguistic and communication elements that will come across in how you prepare people for assessments, what kind of feedback you give to people. So absolutely. And regarding the CLIL techniques, again, I'm not sure we could really identify CLIL techniques, because CLIL is a very wide area. Lots of it borrows from English language teaching or language teaching more generally. And some of what happens in CLIL is from content teaching more generally, so education. But that aside, I think some areas, as you say, if in your context you have a problem with people's proficiency to the point when they don't understand some words, pre-teaching them would be very important. I remember a lecture, for example, given with the word intelligibility, and that was the main word everyone had to understand in order to understand what on earth this lecturer was talking about. And half the room didn't understand anything that was said because they didn't have a moment to find out what does intelligibility mean. So if they just said intelligibility means you can understand something, the whole lecture would make sense, but nobody understood. So pre-teaching is an area, and there's lots of obviously techniques you can use to pre-teach, vocabulary, particular language forms that are going to come up. Focusing on the language that's involved in the content, so or maybe having a division between language and content as a focus. There's reading, so how do you deconstruct the reading? You might set readings that students can't read. That's a problem. You cannot deliver content if students can't read it.
No.
So how do you deconstruct the text? How do you notice features of the text that might be clues about the genre, clues about how people communicate in this field? If students are not aware of it and they can't do it, then that might be useful for EMI. Feedback. Students who are consistently having trouble attaining good scores because of language problems, you have to consider that language might have to come into the feedback. So you need the expertise of people who are language teachers or language teaching experts who know how to give good feedback about coherence, cohesion, devices in writing, structures in writing that might be helpful for them answering a task. Communication, focusing on communication in writing rather than just the content. The content might not be coming through because of the communication problems. So it's about making those things explicit. I think there are lots of these areas, but also things like open worksheets we've talked about before, where students have a handout with some areas where they can engage together. They can look at things and notice different elements of it, including language. It might be, if you're in a situation where students' proficiency is interfering I mean, the whole group's proficiency is interfering with their ability to understand their reading and producing their assignments, then you have to engage with the language.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't talk about the content. So,
Luciana mentions that it has been said by some researchers it might be especially useful in countries where most students might have low proficiency levels, as in her country. And I can really imagine that situation, that it would not be exactly CLIL or exactly EMI, but some sort of area in the middle where you make your decisions according to the needs of the students. We keep coming back to the same sort of answer, that you need to know your students, know your audience, find out obviously their language proficiency and what their expectations and their needs are, and then you're in a position to actually see where you are on that continuum between CLIL and EMI. And people will be at different points, and then that is the right solution for you.
Yeah. And the one thing I'd say, like the one thing that unifies all my suggestions that I just listed and what Mary's just said is that I think the difference is that in an EMI context, you're drawing students' attention to language that they need for the content purposes of the course. So understanding, communicating the content. What is not helpful in the area of CLIL is something that some universities do, which is to teach general English to students in a completely compartmentalized way, where students have separate language classes saying, it is the cat which has crossed the road. Well done, your grammar construction is lovely. But the next class, they're learning about friction. And there's what's the use of one to the other?
It's no use
whatsoever. It needs
whatsoever.
to be explicit, and they don't have they have very specific goals. And that's the cat which has crossed the road is not going to help them enter their community of practice or get employability skills after they finished their degree, etc., etc., etc. So
it's sort of streamlining, isn't it? All of that knowledge and identifying where you want to go with the students, and then making the choices according to that goal, that destination.
Absolutely.
And that there's absolutely, I mean, it's common sense in a way to incorporate into your teaching whatever the students need to meet the goal. It's sort of self-evident for me anyway.
Yeah, because we are in education, like EMI or any higher education course is not just a gate, a test that's meant for students to be stopped if they're not good enough. It's not a one-off test. It's here are your learning objectives. I'm going to try my hardest as your teacher to help you reach the learning objectives as best I can. If you can't reach there at the end, then you don't get a high score, sorry. But it's not a case of here are your learning objectives, your language ability doesn't allow you to come close, I'm going to ignore that. So there is a lot to learn with that.
There is. I feel that we're drawing to a close.
Yes.
I can't see anything else there. I think we ought to talk about next week a little bit. Next week is the last week nominally of the course. So we will be making another recording next Friday, which will then be uploaded onto the MOOC over that weekend. But the course is then open for another 2 weeks, during which you can continue to read, use the materials, discuss with other participants on the course the issues that they might raise about the various topics that we include as part of the course. It isn't too late, if you have colleagues, it isn't too late to join us, because believe it or not, we have had people joining on the very, very last day, like almost 6 weeks after the first proper day of the course. But we will be running the course again in the autumn, October, in all probability. We don't know the exact date. So I would like you to think about other colleagues that might benefit from this. And is there perhaps a group of your colleagues that might like to follow the MOOC together? Originally, our idea was to think of isolated colleagues, people who have no support, that we would give them that support in their EMI work. But another way of using our materials is to study them together as a group and discuss them and see what is appropriate for your own context, what ideas you can take from the very, very many ideas that people suggest here on the MOOC, what you can take and what's appropriate for your context. So I would like you to be thinking ahead to the autumn. If you could perhaps suggest that you have a little discussion group, part of your teacher development programme, if something like that exists. And also, we would love to keep in contact with you. So if the idea appeals, please join our Facebook group. We'd love to see you there and keep in touch with you that way. But you can always contact Rob and I via our University of Southampton email addresses, which are easy to find.
Yes.
So I think that's more or less it, isn't it, for this week?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
We have been live.
We have been live.
It has been fun.
We're still live. Oh, I get so excited about these. Yes.
And yeah, I've had
it's great.
fun.
It's lovely to have that contact with people in a live situation. Is absolutely wonderful. So thank you very, very much indeed for your comments, for your questions, for your participation.
Absolutely.
And there will be a final video next week.
And again, just to emphasize as well, just for people watching this, watching us talk away, but yeah, there's a lot of wise words, a lot of very interesting questions and contextual insights that are in the comments throughout the 3 weeks we've covered so far.
Yeah.
And I've even seen some in week 4 already.
Yes.
People have raced on ahead.
Yes.
But so please do read through, and there are lots of interesting insights there. So thank you very much for people who participated as well. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening, and we will trouble your ears no more.
Okay, have a good weekend, everybody.
Yes, have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Can I stop waving?
Done.